Lucky today to have one of our keynote speakers from the CMAT conference actually joining us on the webinar. Firstly, I'm your host for today, Rob O'Byrne. I'm the CEO of Logistics Bureau, and dialing in all the way from Munich in Germany, we have Professor Johannes Fottner. Johannes, guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen und willkommen.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely fine and I'm glad to be with you. Even though I'm far away, I'm with you.
Yes, no, it's fantastic to have you with us. And I have to confess, I was having a discussion with Johannes last night, and we were wondering about what to talk about today, and you have some fascinating insights. So let's get right into it. Johannes, how are things going in Germany from a supply chain perspective?
That's a very good question, and to be honest, I think many things are still unclear. So far, many of our factories are still closed, and we are preparing the reopening of the factories. In many cases, it's not clear, was it just closed because of a lack of material, or just because they want to be very careful for their own workers with infectious environments. In the moment, regarding supply chain, we can say there is not a real disruption of the supply chain, except for the situations when the suppliers are closed. So the freight forwarders, they are still running their business as far as they can. We did this significant mistake in the beginning to close the borders, which disrupted even the traffic. But so far, from my feeling, the supply chain is working pretty well, with some exceptions. So I would say, compared to the strange situation we have, it works okay.
That's good. So you're Professor of Logistics Engineering at the Technology University in Munich. So you would have maybe a different perspective to a lot of people on what's going on around the world. Where do you think we got it wrong? In terms of supply chain, we're not going to cure COVID-19 here.
No, my personal impression over the last weeks was that our supply chains were maybe a little bit, let's call it, fragile. So they were very sensitive, which we didn't even recognize over the last 20, 30 years. Because the global markets, even though with some disturbances, were some sort of a laboratory environment. Everything was working very smooth and very uninterrupted. And we optimized everything. I can say, even in science and in research, we optimized everything regarding inventory and especially regarding costs. Maybe we should have had a little bit more focus on robustness.
I think so. Do you think that we're going to see big changes in supply chain in the future? What do you think we're going to learn from this?
We will learn that we will have the third category of optimization called robustness. I hope so. We will learn that there are some critical goods where we should not focus too much on inventory reduction. So I really hope that we will learn not to localize everything, because this would really destroy our global economies. So we should do some sort of a hybrid, somewhere in between. We should be prepared that the supply chain is not always that stable, but there are different categories of goods that are really critical for the production, even for the life of people. There are some others where we can say, if we wait another 2, 3, or 4 weeks, that's not really a big thing. So what we should do as soon as we recovered from the current shock is to analyze carefully, have a look to what happened and what were the impacts to the supply chain. As I said before, it's not completely clear to most people in the moment. Is the closing of the factory a result of a breaking down of the market? Is it a result of lack of materials? Is it because my workers are already infected? So we really don't know which part of our closings and of our problems, current problems that are obvious, are caused by what. So my recommendation would be to do, let's say, detailed analyze and make some really good decisions. I'm a little bit afraid of two things, which is always the case. The first thing is that we don't learn anything. That actually means as soon as everything is reopened, human beings have the tendency to say, oh, it wasn't that bad, so we don't have to learn anything. I think
we have
that
short
was
memories.
yeah, that's what we learned in 2010. We didn't learn so much from the worldwide crisis there. And the second thing is the opposite, to overreact, to say, yes, now we have to support our local markets, we have to localize everything. No, I think both is wrong. We should not switch back globalization. We should not switch back what we gained over the last 20, 30, 40 years, which is really something valuable. We have a very stable worldwide system of economies, of supply chains, of suppliers and producers, and we shouldn't destroy that.
But wouldn't you say? I mean, I sense there's a groundswell in Australia of people having a degree of mistrust now with overseas sourcing, and some countries in particular, and there's quite a groundswell for more manufacturing in Australia, and we want to buy Australian. Do you think that's really going to happen? I just wonder if the public at large is prepared to pay more for products that are locally made.
It's the same problem in Germany. We are high-cost countries, so the sourcing basically allows us that we can provide goods to a broad range of people with different income, and they still can afford that. So we cannot switch back that, because that would mean exactly what you said. Everything would be significantly more expensive. And I think it's not even necessary. I call it normally the calamari effect. If you go every Friday evening to an Italian restaurant and you eat always the same calamari and you like it very much, and you have it once, a bad one, after 5 or 10 years, you will stop immediately eating calamari. And we shouldn't do that because it's a mistake. We should do something which is a hybrid. We should do it for critical goods. So it's not a good idea that all the raw materials we need for medicals and for pharmacy products are exclusively coming from abroad, because there was not anything between human beings. We had still a good relationship. It was a virus that took the supply chain out of the game for a while. But that, as I said, I think we shouldn't do the extremes. Yes, we should support our local economies. We should go to restaurants, by the way. We should order in the moment. We should try to localize really emergent goods, but we shouldn't overreact, because that will not be something the world economy can live with.
That's true. We've just had a poll come up on the screen. So for those watching, do fill out the poll. These are always interesting. We've got, during the pandemic, what has been your biggest challenge? Maintaining supply lines, meeting customer demand, workforce safety, or another one. So do please pop in your answer there. And I'm sure Daniel, who's operating at the Hanover Fairs end, will give us an answer very shortly. But I totally agree with you there, Johannes, that we really need to keep the benefits of our global supply chain operating. And I was talking to people in New York and India yesterday, and they were making the point that there are some industries that have massive multi-billion-dollar investments in manufacturing overseas, oil refineries, pharmaceutical factories. You can't suddenly move all of those back to home countries. And I mean, what do you think about the Japanese response in that they're paying companies to bring their manufacturing back into Japan? Is that practical?
It's their approach. It's not the right thing for me to decide what's right or wrong, but my personal opinion is this is clearly wrong. I wouldn't do that because who wants to go back for 50 years? Nobody wants that. because it also means that we have to accept the disadvantages of going back 50 years. We have very well working relationships. We have, I just can emphasize this. We had a very well working supply chain globally for many, many years. And even through SARS and through the pig flu we had about 10 years ago, it was not a bigger problem. It's the first time. Actually, yes, for some specific reasons, there might be a good relationship between some pandemic situations and our global businesses, because people are traveling around the world, people are meeting all over the place. So a virus is just traveling with us. He cannot travel alone. But do we really want to stop this? No, I don't think so. That would be a real big mistake.
We've just had the poll results in. I'm not sure if you can see those at your end,
Yeah,
Johannes.
I can see it.
Yeah, so maintaining supply lines, we've got 33% have that problem. Meeting customer demand, 6%. Well, that's good. Workforce safety, 22%, and other, 39%. Very interesting. Thank you, folks, for doing that. So, Johannes, to come back to your question on robustness, have we been fooling ourselves over the last couple of decades in running our supply chains as lean as we have been? And if we have, what do you think we need to fix in the future?
Yeah, I would say we had most companies, most researchers, most scientists, if they did an optimization calculation for supply chains, they obviously had the two categories: inventory reduction and cost reduction. And that was important because especially the high-cost countries had to set up a new system for production, which allows them to still provide goods to the worldwide economy for competitive prices. So it was important to do that. And we always knew that the biggest risk in supply chain management is disruption of the supply chain. But there was not a reason to really highlight that one risk. We did everything that even if there is an accident of a truck or something smaller happening, the supply chain is not completely disrupted. So, for instance, bigger car factories sometimes use helicopters to bring really important parts to the assembly line. But in our case, we have a global pandemic situation. That's something we never had before. So we did not bring that too much in account, and we did not consider that too much in the design of our supply chains. Yeah, I would say if we use the famous words, lessons learned, and we learn a little bit out of the situation, we are in a better condition after the crisis than we have been before. But there was not a mistake going on in the past. To make this absolutely clear from my point of view, what we did was a very logical and correct reaction to a very stable market and a very stable supply chain. And if I read in your little analyze there, maintaining supply chains was the biggest challenge. It's still the question, is it a question of freight forwarding, or is it a question of sub-suppliers that are disrupted in their production? And both is having the same effect from the point of view of the company, but from a point of view of this on the supply chain, it's a completely different thing.
I understand. If there are people who've joined us here today and maybe they're struggling in the current supply chains, what would you say to people would be the most important thing to focus on right now? One or two things. I mean, when I talk to lots of different companies, they're not in panic mode. We're engineers, supply chain logistics people. We approach these things logically, but they're having to deal with a lot more than they would normally, and lots of different priorities. Where would you say is the greatest priority?
The really greatest priority for the moment and for the time coming for the next, let's say, 2-3 months is watch carefully, analyze. and don't just have one look, and if you see one reason what went wrong, that's maybe not the exclusive reason. There might be more than one reason for the problems occurred. So analyze carefully and do not overreact in the one or the other direction. I said that before, but unfortunately I have to repeat that once again, because that would be the biggest mistake we could do. That would destroy not just a little bit of growth, that would destroy the basement of our worldwide economy. So have a look, make good decisions where you have to localize. And I agree that we should localize specific things. That's not a question. Maybe sometimes we don't have to localize the full production, but at least be sure that we have some sort of inventories. We couldn't have inventories for a situation like we see now, where we have maybe 2-3 months of disruption. But maybe we did not even see the biggest problem. The biggest problem would be if first one country goes down, then the next country goes down, the third country goes down. We were pretty fast this time. Everything started in January. Everything was down in March. That's really fast. So some companies are not even too sad that the deliveries are reduced now because they don't need the material. But imagine if your production system is running under full speed, but your supplying country is not running under full speed, then we will have a problem. It's a synchronized process. And the only way to desynchronize this is having a look to, let's say, healthy inventories. Make a smart inventory management system. Make a smart localization system. Try to produce the emergent goods we need for our lives locally, or have at least a second or third source. But we have to use that regularly. We cannot expect that we prepare everything for a disaster, and we have a third source in our own country, but we don't use it until there's a situation like that. It will not work. No. So we have to be prepared even in perfect times, and that's something which we are not really good in. As long as everything is running under very good conditions, we will not prepare everything for a situation like now.
I think that's very wise. That we might have a little bit more local manufacturing just as a backup, and like you say, we should be using that supplier to make sure that the whole process works. Do you think though, and you make a very good point, that we shouldn't disassemble all of the things that we've learned over the last couple of decades? Our supply chains are global. Do you think though that we'll see a little bit of a shift in sourcing strategies, maybe from country to country, and diversification? Again, I was talking to a guy in India who's involved in pharmaceutical manufacturing, and he said it's not going to move tomorrow. There's billions of dollars of investment here. We do a good job here. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm afraid I have to say yes. I believe that we will see that. For several reasons. The first one is because it's a logical thing. Now we have our fingers burned, so we will try to do something different from before. But there's a second effect we will see. There is a real recession going on. That might be just a recession for a couple of months, because it's not a fundamental recession. It's not something which is based on changes in the market. But we have a situation where the profit, we cannot even talk about profit. The financial situation of many companies has changed within just a couple of weeks significantly. So there is now a balance between maybe reduced investments and maybe even some sort of being afraid of a situation coming back like this, because we have to be prepared that this first phase of the pandemic situation is not the final one. So there will be something going on maybe in 2021 and 2022. That could happen, and I'm not somebody who is really afraid of that. That's just a logical thing. So the overreaction could be something which is just based on psychology and on the lack of financial resources in the companies. But the good news is that they will not have a chance with this reduced financial capabilities to change everything completely. And that's, for me, a good thing, because it means it will stay halfway stable. And that's important. That's really important, because never forget, it worked very well over the last decade. Even though we had discussions on a political level, we had sometimes big trouble between different countries. We even survived this stupid thing between China and United States in the last 2 years. So we should not forget that we have shown that the system is really working well. It was just not designed for a pandemic.
Yeah, sure. So I know you have a very keen interest in your work in automation and robotics and technology. Do you think that people are going to be a lot more conservative in their supply chain investments going forward? So, I mean, there's massive investments in automation and so on, but are we going to have to turn back the clock a little bit and rely on having much more flexibility in our supply chains and maybe, you know, people that we can move around rather than locking into lots of automation?
Yeah, I honestly speaking, I think it's the opposite. What we have seen was, I have to start a little bit different. Whenever I gave a presentation somewhere all over the world, many people asked me the question, when will we end up with dark factories? So dark factories because there are no human beings in the factory anymore. And I always said, we will not have dark factories, we will have smart factories. And smart factories are factories where we see human beings, but they are interacting with automated and autonomous systems. What we have seen over the last weeks was nobody had to care about autonomous systems because they were really designed for a pandemic situation. We do not need so many people in the environment. Robots are not caring about viruses, at least not about that type of virus, maybe some other viruses. But I think we saw that the past always told us there is an opposite between automation and flexibility. No, that's no longer the case. We did a lot of design and research and development to combine automation with very high flexibility. So most autonomous systems, you can scale easily. You can do that very, very well. Yes, human beings are really flexible, but especially in a situation like now, it's not the question that we can move around people from here to there. It's just not possible.
It's actually easier to move robots and cobots.
Yeah, absolutely. And I strongly believe that many companies will think about or who have experience with automated systems will even tell others, hey, that was my least problem in this crisis. That worked well. And I even strongly believe that we can take away people from critical areas. We can have a lower density of workers in a specific area when we use this innovative technologies. So I wouldn't see a lack of investment. Yeah, there is the financial reason. I have to invest, and if I don't have money, I cannot invest. But from a logical reason, I think we have shown these are the right approaches for a stable production environment.
Excellent. Okay. I'll just remind those watching, if you have any questions for Johannes, do put them into the chat box, and I'll try to make sure that we have time at the end to answer those. So do please type them in. Can I just take you off on a different tack just for a moment? So we're finding from a supply chain perspective, this coronavirus is a real challenge. Is this an opportunity as we come out of this to redesign our supply chains, to not just think of how we cope with pandemics, but to look even further forward and say, how can we build in more robustness, but also better sustainability in our supply chains? Is this a chance to really rethink what we do?
It would be a chance. The question is, will we take the chance? I can say we have a very intensive discussion between my colleagues from the universities and the researchers And as you know, I spent a significant time of my life in industry, so I still have very good contacts to industry. And we are discussing in the moment a lot. I spend a lot of time at the telephone thinking about what could we do in a little bit of a different way. Um, there is a very good chance that we use the results and without any overreaction would give good thoughts to the design of supply chains and change them a little bit to a more stable and robust version. Unfortunately, let's wait until the factories are running well again. Maybe our mindset will not allow us to remember the bad times. That's something human beings are really good in that. And maybe we even find out it was not that bad as we expected, so there is no reason for changing anything. But I would fully agree with your sentence. It would be a great chance to do that. And without an overreaction, we would not even miss our goals of efficiency and cost reduction and all that stuff. They are still important for a competitive world. And also for, as you said before, for providing goods to customers for an attractive price level. That's important. A significant part of these costs are logistics costs. So we have to have that in mind. But there is a good chance to learn from a situation like this. And the good chance would be to take some insights, some ideas, some new solutions out of that and implement them in the future.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, I think we have a couple more polls if you'd maybe like to get one of those up as we're running into the last few minutes. So you're heavily involved in research and teaching. How will your teaching change? So yeah. I'm not. You've said we shouldn't overreact, but I'm sure you must be thinking we need to be teaching something else here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the first thing, how teaching changed, we use completely new versions of teaching. So Technical University of Munich already decided that we will not have any normal lectures in the summer semester. So I'm sitting now every day in front of my laptop and recording all my lectures. But I think you wanted to talk more about the content of the lectures.
Yes.
And I'm lucky because I'm not a pure supply chain management guy at the School of Management. I'm in the mechanical engineering. So I can still focus on good solutions that make the whole supply chain more robust, which was already the content of the last years. We talk a lot about autonomous systems. We talk a lot about digitalization. And if you ask me for one thing, which is really important, is a high reactiveness. And that actually means the basic idea of Internet of Things was not that I have a fully automated factory. The first thing was that I have all information available at all different members of the supply chain. And we found out over the last weeks, that's really important to know really early if there is a disruption going on, to react immediately. And that's also something we learned from the crisis, not just regarding supply chain management, a fast reaction by providing all information to all relevant parties. That's the basis for a really successful and stable system. It's all about reactiveness.
No, that's excellent. So we have another poll question there. Have you noticed an upturn or downturn in demand during the pandemic? So we've got upturn, downturn, or no change. So that raises an interesting question, and one that I'm constantly asked. So from your perspective, Johannes, which industries appear to be suffering most? Which ones are going to come out of this a lot stronger? And maybe which ones do you think are going to have to change the most?
Yeah, actually, you can see in my haircut. My haircutter is suffering the most, unfortunately, because he really had to close and he's not allowed to open now. No, seriously, as we have seen, everybody who is prepared for online things, for digital business, was not suffering very much because people are still having their demands and their needs. And so consumers still buying. It's not the case that everybody stopped buying. It's the problem that you cannot get everything because you're not allowed to go into the shops. all restaurants and smaller shops, especially in Europe, had to close down completely. And it was even strange because the garages were not allowed to make the change of the tires from winter tires to summer tires. We need to do that. So the demand is still there. And I think that's important for deciding who is suffering. Who is suffering for a short term. That actually means I'm not allowed to sell because my shop is closed. That's especially the smaller ones. The bigger companies, had to close down because the people don't buy cars in the moment because they have to do something different and they want to do a test ride before they buy it. But I do not believe that they stop to buy cars for the rest of the year. They postpone it, and we will not compensate the downturn we saw over the last 4 weeks. But if we are good, we should start at the same point where we stopped in mid of March. So I wouldn't see that very hard. So as a summarize, I would see the smaller shops, they really suffer the most. The bigger factories, the bigger companies producing goods for consumers, like very important automotive suppliers in Germany. For us, that's really core of the business. They will restart on a very good point from my point of view.
Yes, I think so. So we've got our poll results there. About 57% are seeing a downturn. So hope that improves for you all very soon. We probably have time for one more question. We are trying to run to a strict deadline. I'll just wait for a moment before that question comes in. While you're thinking of any questions, just to kind of summarize your point of view here, Johannes, would I be right in saying let's not roll back globalization, but maybe look at some local manufacture of essential things? Let's really steam ahead on technology and automation, and let's make sure that we're measuring data accurately and we know what's going on and we're sharing information. Would that be sort of 3 key points? What else would you add?
Absolutely, and even the priorities are the right ones. The first one, really don't destroy what we gained over years. That's important. And if we are really good and we do not start to think just on a national basis, we have a really good chance. Yes, I agree. We have a downturn on demand in the moment. We have a downturn of the whole industry, but we have a really good chance to say, let's just cut this piece between the mid of March and let's say somewhere in June out of the game. But we have a chance to restart on a maybe a little less lower level, but on a close level.
Okay. We do have a question from Keshav. Will we have drone delivery for products in the near future? Well, we're asking the right man, aren't we?
Especially the Germans really like the drones. I privately have a little drone.
Oh, we all.
Yes. And I hope I do not destroy my whole environment by saying this sentence. I do not believe in delivery drones for several reasons. It's a very critical thing. And as you know, they are flying in the air, so there is always a risk of falling down. And so especially the biggest challenge is for just aerodynamic reasons. A drone that could transport, let's say, 10, 15 kilograms would be really a huge one.
So, and dropping that by mistake could be disastrous.
I have a little garden in my front yard. So if you drop it from, let's say, 5 meters, only 70% of the goods would be destroyed. But it could not land in the garden. So I do not believe that's a solution. It will be a solution for specific demands, but not for regular transport.
Great answer and great question, Keshav. Professor Johannes, I think we'll need to draw to a close there. Thank you so much for I know you had to get up a little bit early and have your coffee early. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating to hear your views. And I know everyone watching today, along with me, appreciates your time and your comments. Sensational. Now, just before we go, I've been asked by the Hanover Fairs Company just to mention that we do have a session coming up next week. And it's also on Thursday at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we have Abdul Jafar, General Manager, Supply Chain and Quality Assurance from Fantastic Furniture. Abdul is a fascinating guy. He loves data, has great ideas on supply chain. So we'll look forward to that one. And apparently there'll be an email coming out to us all on Monday with the registration details. So and the other speakers in the series. But we have got off to a sensational start with Johannes today. So you have set the bar high in terms of the knowledge that you've been sharing. So Johannes, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Okay.